we're talking in our counselling foundations about the importance of ethics within a counselling practice. Why are they important?
Well, I think that's a really good question, isn't it? And I think they're important because as practitioners, and I think in our own lives, really, we have to think about doing the right thing. And ethics help us and guide us into doing the right thing. And there's different forms of ethics. For those of you who are interested in being scholarly, you can look at different forms of ethics. But in terms of counselling, we have counselling codes of ethics, and here in the UK, we have a number of ethical bodies, and they have their own sets of ethics, but they all boil down to the same thing: making sure that we are in service of the client, making sure that this is the client's agenda and the client's needs and issues that are at the forefront of everything we do, and not our own. And I think that's a that's a reasonably compact summary of ethics, Ken.
Yeah, very much so. So when you graduate, when you are a practicing counsellor, chances are you will join a professional body, and the professional body has a code of conduct, as it were, or a set of principles or ethics that we should work in between. And I guess in the same way as if we were working with a client, we would have a contract outlining what is on offer, what the boundaries are, so that the client understands where I guess the boundaries within which that they can bring their content. It's the same with us as counselors. Having a code of ethics, it gives us a compass. It gives us a moral guidance of how we should show up, who we should be, what we should strive for. So ethics are not always something that you should have. Some of the ethics are to strive towards becoming. And I guess one of the very important reasons for ethics is to mitigate and monitor risk, and to provide some form of accountability to the client who is working with a practitioner. But that mitigate and monitor risk, really important area in the ethical framework, because as you've said, Rory, in every ethical framework related to counselling and psychotherapy, you're going to have non-maleficence, I think it's called, where it is to do no harm. The last thing we want to do is be doing any kind of harm or damage to a person who may come in a fragile state to start with. So mitigating that risk, being able to monitor what that looks like, very important part of having an ethical framework.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And it gives us standardization no matter where a client goes. So if a client, goes to see a counsellor in London, or goes to see a counsellor in Edinburgh, or in Wales, the therapist should be, or the counsellor should be working towards the same ethical framework. And I'll pick up on what you said. It's not about being perfect. It's about striving to offer the very best possible service. And one of the interesting things about ethics, they're made up of a number of components, and one of the components is called utilitarianism, which is, word. It's a big word, isn't it? Made famous, of course, by Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, who are philosophers, and they basically were saying that the wider needs of society need to be put forward. That basically the greater good, and that forms one part of ethics. And also Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative. In our house we speak of little else.
I bet.
And, when we're having our lunch, we speak of little else. And basically that is that to put it in a nutshell, that is the ethics of being fair and seeing the individual, and that fits in really to medical ethics and counselling ethics. But yes, it's about also mitigating risk. I think that if you're working within an ethical framework, you're less likely to do any damage to a client. You're less likely to cause a client distress. You're less likely to cause yourself distress, because obviously, if you go off the beaten path, if you like, and get into some difficulties with clients, you may find yourself, in front of an ethics board or having to explain your actions. So I like to think of ethics rather like a climbing frame. In my youth, we used to have a big metal box made out of scaffolding poles. Used to call it monkey bars, and you could climb inside. And if you're on the inside and you slip, you could only fall so far before you hit the next level and you could hold on again. However, for those young people who are on the outside, if you slip, you fell right to the floor and hurt yourself. So it is a framework, and I think thinking of it in that way is very, very useful. When you're inside a framework, you've got lots of things to hold on to.
I love that. I love that. And, you know, we're speaking about that framework, that ethical framework, those ethics there. And we started off by saying to protect the client so that no harm is done. But at the same time, reflecting on what you've said, Rory, there is protection for you as the therapist as well. It protects you because you have the operating procedures, really. And that's another thing, you know, you can look to your ethical framework to establish your policies and procedures within your own practice. So the ethical framework can guide those policies and procedures. And there is, of course, the opportunity if a client feels that the counsellor has fallen short, or if they've been mistreated in any way, through a professional body, clients can make a complaint, and always the ethical framework will be brought out and the complaint will be measured against the ethical framework. And if you can evidence that you as the practitioner worked within the ethical framework, then you're going to be okay. It is there to protect you and your practice. And I think what's really important when we speak about the ethical framework is to read it on a regular basis, because they can be pretty lengthy. They can be pretty thick documents, but they're there for you and they're there for your clients. It is highly, highly recommended that when you contracting with a client, that you may mention your professional body. You may mention that you are working to an ethical framework, and that you would make that ethical framework available to that client, either in an electronic format or in a printed version, if that is appropriate for your practice. But it's a good idea to know what it is that you're handing over in depth. And I know, Rory, you at one stage had the ethical framework next to your bed, I believe it was, and you just read a paragraph here and there as you went along. You don't have to eat it all in one big go.
Yes, I had it on my bedside table, and it's interesting, Ken. I think that brings up an interesting point. In those days, I'm a member of the British Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy, and the BACP framework I worked to in 2004, 2005, when I first qualified, was sometimes referred to as a bit woolly. The latest iteration, which was 2018, as this broadcast is made, is a little bit more precise, and it uses terms like "we must" and "we should," and we would always. Which means that if you look at the framework, where it says "we must" and "we should" means you should be doing it. And there is other parts of the framework where you could take a view as a practitioner. You could take a view. You get a little bit more leeway as long as you can justify it ethically. But yes, it is now really a very, very substantial document, as is the framework from the National Counselling Society. And the UKCP, the United Kingdom Council for Psychotherapy, has their own. That's a little briefer, I have to say. But all of the ethical bodies have also sub-documents. So the ethical framework is not the beginning and the end. There's ethics in terms of being on social media, working with children, that type of thing. So there's lots of sub-documents that you can have a look at. But yeah, it's a really interesting. It's a really interesting part of our profession, and one that, as Ken said, you need to engage with. You know, if you've not looked at the ethical framework, you should be. It's like when you drive. How often do you look at the highway code? But you should.
Yeah, specifically when things are changing, as you rightly mentioned there, Rory. The BACP framework that you referred to, last updated in 2018, came with some significant changes. And when it's good to revisit the framework, check that. And I guess another reason for ethics is they can guide us in what training we could be doing. You know, they can indicate that we may need some training in a certain area. You've mentioned some of the musts and shoulds from the new framework or the latestly updated framework from the BACP, you may see something there and go, well, actually, I don't fully understand that. And it would maybe around, well, whatever topic it is, it can give you an indication of there's an area of CPD I would like to dive into to fully understand that. If we look at the ethics of protecting a person's information and data and not breaking confidentiality, and we look at specifically here in the UK a new legislation that came in just a few years back called GDPR, or General Data Protection Regulation, which kind of indicates that if you have any kind of electronic data held, and that is a client's data, that you have to be handling that data in a certain way. And here again, you may look to that and go, well, what do I need to do here? And it would indicate an area where one would train. It's almost like a torch that would shine in a light in an area where you look at something and go, don't fully get that. I know I have to do it. I'm going to train in that area. So I think it's good as a guide, as a compass, as a protective frame for us as the practitioner, for our clients. It offers, I guess, a standardization where all practitioners working within that professional body to that framework would be expected to be working similarly, I guess. I mean, they'd have their own practice style, but similarly from an ethical standpoint. And of course, ethical frameworks differ from organization to organization, but they tend to also be the same. So it's different but the same. In other words, the underlying principles will be the same, but the wording may differ slightly. And one of the tasks called upon students, of course, during study is to compare and contrast ethical frameworks to have a look at them. So you were mentioning the British Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy, BACP. I have in front of me here the National Counselling Society Ethical Framework, working towards the good of clients, doing no harm, being trustworthy and responsible. And then, of course, they put the big word in there: fidelity, respect for the dignity and the rights of the client, autonomy, justice. There's some lovely words, I think, in ethical frameworks, and I like it. And I must say, when I was studying and I was looking at ethics and I was looking at ethical frameworks, it gave me not just a framework for my practice, it kind of gave me some ideas for a framework of my life and who I want to be. And it made me, I guess, realize that I operate in my daily life from a set of ethics. And it challenged me to work out what those ethics are. And I'm much happier having that framework there. I think there's a lot of comfort in it, Rory.
Oh, I think there is. And one of the main reasons that we have ethics is to stop tribalism. I think that if you have an ethical framework, an agreed set of principles, you don't get, or you shouldn't get it. It may not always be the case, but what you don't get is tribalism or inward looking. You're always outward looking. You're always looking outwards towards the framework. And I'll pick up on the point you made about it impacting on your life. It's had a huge effect on my life. I'm more thoughtful about interactions I have and things like confidentiality. There was something that happened the other day where someone I knew was talking about someone else's data, and I'm thinking, no, don't be saying that. That's someone else's data. And I kind of said, in a very thoughtful way, maybe that person wouldn't really want that information shared because that's private to them. So it can make you a little bit pious, I think. But, doing the right thing can sometimes be seen like that. And ethics, if we can sum it up in a neat phrase, is doing the right thing.
Like that. I think that's taking everything that we've just said, putting it into, we could have done this episode just saying ethics, doing the right thing. Right, moving on to the next topic. Rory has provided a super duper handout. If you're interested in this topic, you want to have a think about it, you want to discuss it with colleagues, if you're a student, if you want to kind of look deeper into this, you will find a download, little overview of what we've spoken about today, and you can download that, have it for your reference. But we hope that has been an interesting topic for you.